Welcome to this video revision lesson on Jekyll and Hyde, and in particular tackling the question on the AQA paper. Remember, the Jekyll and Hyde question comes on paper 1 alongside your Shakespeare, and it's an extract based question. Okay, so a quick reminder of the assessment objectives. They are AO1, AO2 and AO3 for this question. I've kept AO4 on there because it's relevant to the Shakespeare question, but for this question it's AO1, AO2 and AO3, and that's 12 marks and 6 marks for AO3, which is context. You can have a little read of them if you need to again. So briefly, what does the question look like on the paper? Well, here's an example of one now, which is on the investigation. There's a couple of things that you should do before you start actually reading the extract. And the first thing is to read the bold writing on top of the extract, because it gives you the context for where the extract falls within the actual wider novel. So in this case, it says, read the following extract from chapter 2, then answer the question that follows. In this extract, Mr. Utterson is waiting to catch up Mr. Hyde outside the door he uses to enter Dr. Jekyll's home. So that's the first thing you do. Then you still don't read the extract because you need to read the question first, so you know what to look out for within the extract. So read below the extract, then you've got the question. It says, starting with this extract, explain how Stevenson presents the investigation in the novella. So every single thing you're going to be highlighting and annotating on this extract must relate to that question, the investigation. Everything you then go on to write about must refer in some way, shape or form to the investigation that Utterson undertakes. Okay, now the 2 bullet points, and I'll come back to these in a minute. The first bullet point is how Stevenson presents the investigation in this extract, that should say actually, and then the second one is how Stevenson presents the investigation in the novella as a whole. So there's 2 ways of answering it. You could do 2 PE paragraphs on the extract and 2 on the wider novella, or you could do 3 very detailed paragraphs and discuss both the extract and the wider novella as you go. It's up to you which way. The examiners don't mind which way you do it, but again I'll touch on that in a minute. Right, so the question's about the investigation. So first thing you could do is jot down what you know about the object of the question, which in this case is the investigation, and how it's presented throughout. So I've just put down some bullet point notes. If your membership allows you to print off the PDFs, well, this is one of the pages you could print off, and a nice little revision sort of resource for you. I've said it's an informal investigation because it's not led by the police. Remember, Utterson is a lawyer. He's just merely Jekyll's friend, who's curious about the role of Hyde in his friend's life and sets about trying to ascertain what the hell is going on. Remember, he knows about Hyde from 2 sources. First, in the first chapter, The Story of the Door, his friend Enfield tells him a story about Hyde and the little girl when he trampled calmly over the little girl, and then the compensation and the cheque, the curiosity with the cheque with Jekyll's name on it. But Utterson already knew about Hyde through his friend's will. Remember, the curiosity of the will, the red flag that started waving in Utterson's mind when he heard his friend talk about his will, is that in the will, Jekyll states that if he dies or if he disappears for 3 months, then Hyde takes everything. He inherits everything. And that's a real confusion because Jekyll and Utterson are very, very old, dear friends. But Utterson's never heard of or seen this person Hyde before. So anyway, it's an informal investigation, not led by the police. Instead, Utterson leads it, and he's a lawyer, reliable, serious and trustworthy, so we take his discoveries and conclusions as accurate. Remember, it's kind of third-person narrative, slightly limited third-person narrative insofar as we don't ever have the overall picture. The narrative switches perspectives through the use of letters and diaries and so on. But we basically go on this journey of discovery. We accompany Utterson on his investigation, and because he's a lawyer, we know he's reliable and trustworthy, so we take any of his discoveries as accurate, even though they are incorrect. Retrospectively, we understand they are incorrect. The object of the investigation is to establish what hold Hyde has over Jekyll. Utterson is convinced he's blackmailing him. Utterson is determined to ensure his friend's reputation is not harmed by Hyde. Now, you can link this to Victorian status and expectation and repression here. He sees it as his duty, and we'll look at the extracts in a minute to reinforce that particular point. There is also an element of Utterson being somehow envious of whatever it is Jekyll has going on. Remember, Utterson lives a very austere existence, but does look on with envy at the men he defends who can act on impulse without worrying over the consequences. It may explain why he so enthusiastically launches into this investigation. The investigation is full of mystery and intrigue, immersed as it is in Gothic imagery throughout. Look at the role of the fog, for example. The investigation drives the narrative. We find out as Utterson does. So it's linked to third-person limited narrative, as I've already just mentioned. It is often a very confused picture. We don't fully understand what's happened until the final chapter. And again, you can link that with the use of the fog by Stevenson and the rationale behind choosing Victorian London as a setting for this novel, even though Stevenson himself would have been far more familiar with his home city of Edinburgh. The investigation contains numerous climax points full of disbelief, shock and horror, and we'll look at those later as well. Okay, so there's just some basic ideas in response to the topic of the question, which is about the investigation. I've just printed out this extract question and I've highlighted it, annotated it, as you can see on the screen now. It's just an example. You don't have to worry about what I've actually written there. Good luck if you think you can decipher some of it. I wasn't writing it for it to be read by anybody else. It was just for my own benefit. And so I find that a useful task, and I would absolutely advocate you do this at the start of the exam. You have 52 minutes roughly to answer this question in the exam. You should be spending 5 or 6 minutes at the start planning out your answer, and that starts with jotting down a few ideas about what you know about the question, and then going through the extract like this, and then you can draw comparisons or links with other parts in the story as well as you go. Okay, so having now read and annotated the extract, you should jot down some points you've identified as being relevant from the extract. So based on my own annotations, I've put down the following 5 bullet points. Could be a difficult investigation, shrouded in mystery. And evidence, fog, city, moon. Gothic imagery helps create this atmosphere as Utterson began to haunt the door. Method and meaning. You'll hear me say this a lot throughout all my videos. Identifying techniques, that's the method, but you must explore what's the impact of that, the meaning. So to get the top grade, you need to do that. Okay, repetition of post plus nightly patrols implies Utterson sees this investigation as his duty. So the method, repetition, the meaning sees this as his duty. The word post is repeated. From the extract, the investigation could be dangerous. The low growl of London as my evidence, personifying London. Utterson sees the investigation as a game, a challenge with the play on words. If he be Mr. Hyde, I shall be Mr. Seek. And my final observation from the extract is the use of sibilants as Hyde approaches, swelled out suddenly, giving him a snake-like quality, snide, serpent-like, to be feared. And when you go through the extract, you may well pick out 1 or 2 further points. That's absolutely fine. Just quickly linking it to other parts in the novella, I've jotted down these 2 observations, and I do revisit this later on in a lot more detail. But the first one, this fog theme continues into chapter 4 as Utterson escorts Inspector Newcomen to Soho and to Hyde's living quarters. In spite of the 9 AM time, the air is filled with swirling wreaths and a mournful reinvasion of the fog, continuing the sense of a battle. So this funeral imagery, coupled with the battle between 2 forces, good and evil, implies that the outcome of the investigation could be very bad indeed, possibly even for Jekyll, filling Utterson with a touch of terror. The second point I could make from elsewhere in the novella, the investigation shares narrative perspective, third-person narrative limited, effectively reflecting its checkered nature and uncertain outcome. We learn a lot through documents that fall into the hands of Utterson, a common feature of the Gothic tradition. This constant switching of narrative voice lends intrigue and tension to the investigation, a structure used specifically by Stevenson to keep certain facts hidden from the reader. The Gothic tradition of using diaries, letters, wills, etc. to drive the narrative, that's a bit of contextual information there. Okay, so that's getting ahead of myself a little bit. So just a reminder again of the actual specifics of the question. So starting with this extract, How does Stevenson present the investigation in the novel? All right, okay. So that's the key part of the question. Every point you make must reference the investigation. You focus on the investigation in the extract, as I've shown you just now, and also then in the wider novel. You can be making notes on the exam paper or the top of your answer booklet with these points in mind. So, how to structure your answer, I've touched on it earlier. There are two possible approaches you can take. It really does not matter from an examiner's perspective. I prefer the second approach where, as you're making your points in the extracts, you can then link to other parts in the play, in the novella in this case, or in the play in Shakespeare's case. It's up to you. It's a personal preference. I find it's more logical. It lends a greater fluency to my answer if I do that. But to make sure that you are addressing both bullet points equally, it could be advisable to do 4 detailed paragraphs, 2 based on the extract and 2 based on the wider novella. And I'm going to look at that approach for this particular answer now. But whichever approach you take, you need to make sure that you structure each paragraph so that it contains the specific elements the examiner will be looking for. Now, to use this, you could use the following. I'm not going to read through the P2C. You can read that yourselves. You might have other acronyms from your teachers. Absolutely fine. PEAL, so it's that point, evidence, analyse, link to the question, which is important. It's probably the one area that's kind of left out of the P2C format. But whichever suits. It doesn't matter which order you incorporate these points in, so long as they're all contained within each paragraph. The context is 20% of the marks, so it doesn't need to be in every paragraph, but certainly in half of them. To get the top band grades, you need to employ what's known as tentative analysis. We don't know definitively what Stevenson's intentions were. We can infer, we can have a guess. So we can offer alternative interpretations as well as one possible interpretation. Just simply using connectives such as perhaps or however or could. These will help elevate your analysis and your grade into the top band. That's 7, 8, 9, and then finally on the page, excuse me, on the screen, a quick summary of how to analyze a link, quote, explain, subject terminology, effect, and then explore alternative meanings. Right. Okay. Recent examiner's course I was on suggested that a brief introduction is a really good piece of advice to give students across the literature paper. It sets out your idea behind your answer in just one sentence or 2 shorter sentences. So, for example, remember the question's about an investigation. I've jotted down 2 possible introductory sentences here. First one, Utterson is a very serious character in the novella, a character who takes the reader on a journey to discover the truth that lies behind the relationship between Jekyll and Hyde. This journey takes on the form of an investigation that twists and turns and isn't fully resolved until the very last chapter. Or, the detective genre was made popular towards the end of the 19th century by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, and Jekyll and Hyde shares a lot in common with this. So just a couple of little introductory points about the investigation. Then, my first point, it's just a sample point, could read something like this, and you'll see that the bits in black are the different elements that the examiner will be looking for when marking your work. Okay, in this extract, Utterson has taken it upon himself to try to discover more information about the elusive Hyde, and in particular what hold he has over his good friend Dr. Jekyll. He is taking this investigative responsibility very seriously. In fact, he sees it as his duty, that's my point, to remain at his chosen post outside Hyde's residence until such time as he turns up. Repetition of post later in the extract serves to reinforce this notion of some professional obligation on Utterson's part to protect his friend. In Victorian society, reputation was highly valued, to the extent that any scandal could destroy your social standing and ruin your place in the top echelons of Victorian society. A lot of Jekyll's problems stem from having to repress his secret desires in the first place to avoid such public humiliation. It is for this reason that Utterson sets out on this quest to elicit the truth. Utterson's own standing in this society, plus his gravity and determination to protect his friend, ensures the reader is taken along on the same thrilling journey as himself. Embarking upon his nightly patrols serves to illustrate this further, implying he is somehow keeping Jekyll safe. Okay, so you can pause, you can print it out, you can use this as your own, or you can make it better. If you accept that particular challenge, off you go. Be delighted to see it. I'm suggesting some other points you could make. So Stevenson also presents the investigation as something of a game or a battle, but perhaps between good and evil, echoing the theme of duality and the internal struggle going on within Jekyll's psyche. If he be Mr. Hyde, I shall be Mr. Seek, or strong superstitious provision of success as he senses an early victory with the pending arrival of Hyde, who swelled out suddenly. And actually, Hyde didn't swell out suddenly. Here, Sibilants heralds the arrival of Hyde, serpent-like. This sense of conflict between two sides resonates throughout the novella, although it remains unclear at this point the exact role of Jekyll, which side he is on. Even Utterson is unsure, perhaps fueling this investigation even further. Another point you could make, the investigation is also presented as not being without danger, taking place as it does in the fog city and low growl of London. This personification of London lends a sinister feel to the action. The idea that threat and danger is never too far away, with any evil being able to effectively remain obscured from vision in the pervading fog. The inference then is clear. The investigation will also be shrouded in mystery, perhaps revealing half-truths or unthinkable outcomes. Contextual points, London as setting, presence of fog, Industrial Revolution, and the fear of London streets after dark, Gothic theme, and Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper was actually prowling the streets of London about 18 months after this novel was first published. Another point you could make, the fog theme continues into chapter 4. I think I've touched on this a bit earlier. So you can pause the screen. I won't read that again. And I think this is the last one. And again, this comes from earlier on in the video. The investigation shares a narrative perspective, and you can pause and have a little read of that. And I think that's us done for this question. So that's plenty for this question. The trick now is to approach every question in a similar way. By way of revision, start annotating other extracts. If you do a quick Google search, you'll find plenty of exam-style questions to work with, or you'll get some off your teacher at school. There'll be a few more on my website as the weeks progress. Remember, if you're a premium member, you can submit an exam-style answer for me to mark and give feedback to. That's an important point. If you wanted to write this question out in full and you're on the premium package, then do email it to me, and I will take my time, go through it, and give you guidance as to how you can improve your grade. And that's it, I think. Just best of luck with this one and also with the exams as usual. Bye now.